What have you been up to today?
What have I been up to? So I have a real life job, and in my real life big girl job, I work for the state, and so I work with really all communities all over South Carolina.
So you work for the state, but there's a department.
I do. I currently work for DHEC, the Department of Health and Environmental Control, which is going to actually be split come in July. So I'll be in the Department of...
So the E and the C are splitting?
The E and the C are splitting, or the H and the E are splitting, actually.
Oh.
So I will be in the Department of Environmental Services because I don't have anything to do with the health part. So I'll be in the Environmental Services portion, and so today I was in my big girl job in downtown Columbia.
So what do you do in this?
Okay.
What's your degree, your background in your big girl job?
In my big girl job. So for the last 18 and a half years or so, I have worked for DHEC, and I'm an environmental engineer. My background was biosystems engineering with a minor in biomedical engineering, and I always swore that I was going to be a biomedical engineer through and through. I was having nothing to do.
Is a biosystems, bioengineering, I'm thinking is more like human biology?
Right, but biosystems is kind of a mixture of biomedical and environmental. And so that's what I studied.
So it relates to how we interact with the world around us a little bit, and sometimes whether that water is good or bad for you, or
Absolutely.
tree diseases, or maybe allergies, and
all of those kind of wrapped into one, and how the environment affects, the way that we live in it. So studied that, and I always believed I would be a biomedical engineer, and I was going to do that, and I have spent 18 and a half years doing environmental engineering. So never say never, because that's what I've done with my life, but it's been rewarding.
What would a biomedical engineer do?
So it would be more, developing medical devices, medical equipment, those kind of things, and so that was it's very fascinating to me. Medical is still very fascinating to me. I have friends that call me and say, "Okay, Dr. Meredith, what do I need to do for this or that?" I have no medical degree, but I have read a lot. So
all you need is some good, mother's
intuition or
mother's intuition. Yeah, but there's wives' tales. You need wives' tales. You need grandma's stories. Well, here's how we dealt with this, and amazingly, that stuff probably is more effective than most
some of what we
other
have
things
today. Yes.
Devices aside.
Indeed. Yeah. When I was studying, of course, we studied some of those hip implants, knee implants, all those, and so that was part of it as well.
So you were fascinated with the mechanical part of that, or
the biological part of that, really, the human body and how the body reacts with those kind of things. So I always swore.
What's the most fascinating thing you know about the human body?
Oh my.
Childbirth aside.
That is fascinating in itself, because of course I've been through it.
That's beyond fascinating.
It is amazing to me all that the human body can do and go through and still sustain life. I mean, that blows me away. And just, we have the ability, the body has the ability to heal itself in many ways. I absolutely believe in modern medicine. I'll be the first to say, give me the antibiotics, give me the things
all
that
the
I need.
I can get.
Right, absolutely.
In the end, you're mostly helping your body do its own thing.
Help your body do its own thing. And it in working in the environment for our environmental field for the last 18 and a half years, the environment has really been given those same abilities too, and I believe that that's a lot of our Creator that has put those stop gaps in place, and the environment can heal itself, and our bodies in some ways can heal itself. Sometimes they just need a little help. So
you went to Clemson, I believe.
I did. As my dad calls it, the other university in South Carolina.
Okay, so we've revealed some family divisions
family rivalry there, yes.
Okay. Not that I'm from South Carolina, but I've encountered these kind of things.
Right. I got my orange on today because Clemson won our Carolina-Clemson game. So.
Yeah, you spent the day in Columbia.
I did.
There wasn't any risk involved in that.
No risk.
But the thought that I was having was every time I turn around and learn something more about the brain and what it can do, your immune system, what it does. We were traveling this weekend, so you're in the car for several hours, and the wife brings up a story about what it is that you can exercise too much, you can exercise too little. There's a sweet spot where you get a lot of longevity gains, but if you do, in this particular instance, it was talking about resistance training, weightlifting and whatnot. Now a lot of people do a lot of weight training, and because they want to build muscle and whatnot, but there is a point where that provides diminishing returns to longevity.
Absolutely.
You do want to lift weights, you do want to exercise, you want to push your joints, you want to push your muscle fibers, but if you do too much of it, you will actually shorten your life.
Absolutely.
Which is kind of surprising to me. So anyway, every time you learn these kind of things, I'm like, well, this is fascinating to me. This is, I don't know.
I think one of the things that we're learning more about now is the microbiome, and the amount of microbiome that we have in our gut and what all that's doing.
And how much it's connected to your brain.
Connected to your brain. The amount of serotonin that's produced in your gut with your serotonin and tied into your microbiome is huge.
Which is why when you have a good meal, especially with family and friends, you're like, this gives me a lot of pleasure.
Right.
Serotonin being the pleasure.
Right.
Well, maybe not quite the pleasure thing of dopamine, but nonetheless.
Serotonin's good too, though.
Yes, it is. So that's fascinating. So when you thought you were going to be doing biomedical engineering and building new hips and joints and heart machines and so on and so forth, where did you think you were going to do that?
I'm not sure. A lot of that is done up in the Research Triangle of North Carolina. And so we were certainly looking at that area. And then we ended up back in the Columbia area. So there are certainly pharmaceutical companies in the Columbia, South Carolina area as well. But I landed in environmental engineering, and I've really enjoyed it. There is a mixture and kind of a crossover in the first part of what I was doing in environmental engineering. Some of that was looking at contamination and how that affects humans, animals, all the different parts of the environment.
Getting all the stuff that's leached into the rivers.
Absolutely, and what kind of risk that is associated with that for those of us that live in those areas.
So from an environmental engineering standpoint, what's the main focus of that kind of thing? We're not talking about medical devices anymore. We're not necessarily talking about engineering Mother Nature. She's kind of hard to work with.
Right.
She's a little obstinate from time to time.
She can be.
So what does an environmental engineer do?
So, at least what I did for the first 17 and a half years of my career was work with military facilities and work on helping them clean up any kind of historical spills, or even bombs was something else that was kind of under our purview. And that all relates in that we want our water, we want our soil to be cleaned up as much as possible, so that we can, as communities, live around these facilities and be as healthy as possible.
So how many of these bombs are under Lake Murray?
So that's a different entity altogether, but there is Bomb Island in Lake Murray, of course, and
it's not just a happenstance name.
That is not just a happenstance name. That is actually what they considered a formerly used defense site, or FUDs, and so essentially that was an area that the military didn't own, but they operated on. They dropped bombs on, and so the good news is that is kind of quarantined or isolated in itself, right? It's an island, right. It's inside the lake. You can put some signage up around there.
Not every bomb hit the island, so you've got a lot of stuff, I'm sure, underwater.
There is a possibility for stuff to be underwater. Of course, the biggest thing that we're looking at in those instances is, where can humans access? And so that is certainly a site that will be addressed. That is part of it.
So when you were working with the military, where did you work with the military? Was it primarily Fort Jackson? Or?
So I spent 2 years working with Fort Jackson, and then I started working on coastal bases in South Carolina. I worked with the Charleston Naval Complex. Which is Bract, but they're turning it over to a shipyard and all kinds of industrial development there. And then I worked with the Myrtle Beach Air Force Base, which is being turned over to a lot of residential as well as commercial. And then I worked with Parris Island, so they were an active base down there.
So, who's got the coolest military installation that you've done?
That's fighting words for those guys. That is.
This is why I brought it up.
That is fighting words. I best not say, but it was fascinating.
You ask anybody in the Army and the Air Force, well, they just have nice golf courses.
Right.
They don't call it the Air Force. They call it the Chair Force, of course.
Right. I was in a meeting with the Marines one time, and Naval Facilities Command is the kind of their money source, and so I was in a Marines meeting, and I said something about the Navy needs to fund doing this, and the Marines stood up and said, "We're the Marines, ma'am. We're better than the Navy." So, so those are fighting words, but no, it was a really interesting experience. I really started that job straight out of college, 21, 22-year-old kid, and going on to a military facility was unbelievable to me. It's a community within itself. It was a really neat place. We had a great working relationship with the military, with the federal government, and it was a good working. We were all aiming for the same thing, which was a clean and healthy environment. We were just coming at it from different marching orders, if you will. And so we're very blessed. Marching orders. There you go.
It'll be a segue into something later.
So it was a great opportunity though for those 17 and a half years that I worked with them.
Were you ever rejected from entering a base?
I was not. There were times that I was given harder times than others, but I was never rejected from a base.
I tried to go over to Fort Jackson to play golf once, and I'd been on post and I'd played golf there a couple of times when we first had moved here, and had some family visiting, and I'm like, hey, we can go play golf over at Fort Jackson. Wouldn't that be cool? And one of the family was he was a Marine veteran. And so I'm like, well, this would be perfect. We can go over here, we can play golf, and yada, yada, yada. We were rejected. I was turned away.
Wow. Because
my registration had expired, and I hadn't. This was like the first year I was here, and I wasn't into the whole timing with the state, and or with the county rather. So my registration was a little bit expired. And like, no, sir. I'm like, wait a minute. So the vehicle can't come. I can come on post, but I can't bring this vehicle on. Yes, sir, that's correct. Like, all right, so we'll go play golf somewhere else.
That was always an interesting. It made me nervous, again, as a 21, 22-year-old kid to be entering base. I had all my documentation. I was able to go in, but I always felt like I was being watched as I was going in. But it was...
Yeah, that was interesting moving here. We moved here in 2004, and I was working for Blue Cross over on Alpine Road.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, first or second day I was on the job, I stepped outside, taking a break and just kind of enjoying the sunshine and the summer weather. And I'm hearing thunder. I'm looking around going, it's a blue sky. Where is this thunder coming from? It was really, and I hadn't connected things. I asked somebody about it. They're like, well, Fort Jackson is kind of like right there. Oh, yeah, okay, that was interesting. It did make it difficult playing golf over there because you never know when they are on the range doing whatever they're doing and you're in the middle of your backswing.
Right. When I worked with Parris Island, we would go there and their ranges were active quite a bit of the time, and so you would hear they shoot 1 million rounds a year over their ranges there, at least at the time I was working on them, and they would always say that's the sound of freedom.
Yeah.
And absolutely it is.
Yeah, it's weird. Every place has got their own kind of quirky thing. I worked out in California for a while, and I was dizzy. I was at work one day, and I was like, man, I'm feeling kind of dizzy. And somebody said, well, that was an earthquake. I said, what was an earthquake? I said, that's why you're dizzy, because the ground just moved. And it made your ears unbalanced, and you got dizzy.
Right.
And I'm like, really? I said, yeah, it happens all the time. You'll notice it. And from that on, I mean, I didn't feel it, but I would notice I got a little bit dizzy. I'm like, you people have earthquakes like multiple times a day here. They said, yeah, this is LA.
That's something we hardly ever experience here, right?
Yeah, so I mean, you could be almost anywhere, and whatever the local thing is that you kind of get a feel for it, it just becomes part of the landscape, and you start not noticing it.
Right.
So environmental engineering then
Right.
is what we're building dams. What's the objective here? You said you're doing a lot of cleanup, and you said you did a lot of military-based work for 17 and a half years.
Right. So
That's a pretty particular measurement.
that was
Something changed.
Environmental engineering, you can do, anything from hazardous waste, air, water. You have quite a number of avenues, even health and safety. However, in about a year and a half ago, I changed over to water and wastewater, so that's what I get to work with now. And it's been a really rewarding experience. Instead of being the regulator and you have to do this and you have to do that, I still am holding counties and towns in South Carolina accountable, but I'm helping kind of divvy out and oversee projects that are getting federal funding. And so it's either low interest rate loans or principal forgiveness, meaning essentially free money. They get, if it's a small town, they may get some principal forgiveness money to do water and wastewater infrastructure improvement. Right. Because in South Carolina we've got significant need for infrastructure improvement in our drinking water and our wastewater systems. And
how much of this is from just old infrastructure?
There's a lot.
We came up 321 and 301 yesterday, coming up through the southern part of the state, and you're going through a lot of old towns that I think were probably very vibrant in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Right.
They don't seem so vibrant today.
Right.
How much of what you're doing are in these towns that have just, it's almost like we've kind of forgotten about them.
Right. A lot of it.
When you go through a lot of these downtowns, there's dead building after dead building after dead building. Like, there used to be life here.
Right. A lot of it is, especially with the smaller towns and this principal forgiveness funding, it is essentially either rehabbing or putting in infrastructure based on old infrastructure that's aging out. And then, of course, some of these larger low interest rate loans, those are large towns that are expanding their capacity. Perhaps they're bringing in some of these smaller towns that can't really sustain themselves anymore, those kind of things. So it's a good feeling to be able to be in that role and essentially hold the hand and help them get through these hoops to get this federal funding that's coming through. It's a good being from a small town in South Carolina, and a small town in South Carolina has made me a lot of what I am today. Being able to kind of go back and oversee those and help hold the hands of those towns going through it feels good.
How much do you get around the state? Are you primarily just in the office, or I know you do some work from home, but
I do
you get around the state a lot?
I do work in the office some, and then we see all of our projects at least once as they're going through the process. So I'm going to have quite the opportunity to tour all the small towns in South Carolina, I believe. So it's exciting.
You'll find all the little barbecue spots, all the sandwich shops.
All the good mom and pop's places. Yeah.
I know there's a lot of those around.
Absolutely.
And it's one of the things, again, when we were driving back up yesterday, going through Denmark, Norway, gosh, I hope I'm not saying something stupid, north, and Guilford, I think that's right, a couple other places. They're very nice looking towns, and like I said, they appear to have been more vibrant from one town to another. A lot of them, so you mentioned being from a small town. I suspect you're from Gilbert, because I'm pretty sure you went to Gilbert High School.
That's correct.
And what surprises me about a town like Gilbert is there's not much of a downtown.
No.
But there is a train tracks.
Yes.
And that appears to be like the center of town.
The hub, right.
And there's a lot of small towns that I went through yesterday where that train goes right down along Main Street.
Right.
And the town square is just around the track.
Right.
You've got one lineup of buildings over here, another one over there, and your road kind of goes through here, and it's like, okay, we're on this side of the track versus the people on the other side of the track. But the train is like the center of town, which
But
was kind of
that's
cool.
the way that goods and services were brought into these towns
Right.
for the longest time. That
And
was
it's
the
how
only
produce
option.
got out.
Sure, absolutely. That was the only option they had. So
Yeah, it made a lot of sense. So I suspect there's a lot of really cool places to get around and see.
I'm pretty excited to see. I've been from South Carolina my entire life. I've lived in South Carolina my entire life, and there are a lot of these little.
So
tiny
for a
towns
little
I've
while,
never
you
seen.
were excited about the prospect of getting out,
I was, yeah.
and then you
Yeah,
ended up
and then
back here.
landed right back here.
How did
So,
how did that hit you?
home always called back. It really did. It was a short time in which I really looked to go outside of South Carolina, but I have a strong sense of family, and home called back. So
Well, good for you. All right, so the next thing then is, what about your not big girl job?
in my
So in your quote unquote off hours,
my free time.
you don't do anything typical of a Southerner.
No, in my free time.
Someplace along the line, you started making
I
moonshine.
started making a little moonshine. So I am a preacher's daughter, and so people are a little surprised by my choice of
I think the last person that sat there was also a preacher's
She
daughter.
also was a preacher's daughter, and yeah, you know what they say about preacher's kids. So anyway,
I'm the son of a farmer's daughter, so trust me, I hear that.
there you go. But no, my husband is from a long line, I guess, of self-employed folks, and he was not self-employed at the time, but wanted to build a business of his own, and distilling came up, and he had a good family friend that knew a thing or two about it.
How did distilling come up?
How did it come up?
I'm kind of curious about this because I've had the same thought. I'm like, this would be really cool to do.
Yes.
And then I've looked more into it, and holy cow,
Holy cow.
that's not so simple.
It's not. So, 2009, South Carolina passed a law that allowed micro distilleries to open up. And so, my husband had a good family friend who knew a thing or two about distilling, we'll say. And he put in the first application. The guy's name was Lamar. Lamar put in the first application in South Carolina for a micro distillery. And he got a little ways into it and saw all the red tape, all the paperwork, and he said, forget it, I'm not doing it. Lamar was a wonderful guy. He had more certifications, he had a blasting license, he had his CDLs, you name it, he could do it. He did not have a high school diploma. And so he saw all the red tape and he said, forget it, I'm not doing it. So at that time...
Now he knows why everybody in the family history did it in the backwoods.
In the backwoods, that's exactly why you did it in the backwoods, because you didn't have to deal with all this. So we had a 6-month-old baby at the time, and my husband came to me and he said, I want to build a distillery. And I said, I don't care what you want to do, I just want to sleep. So we...
Yeah, that opportunity's passed.
That's
I can't
right.
go use that one.
famous last words. I may have regretted that. No, so we did about a year's worth of research, 2 years worth of paperwork, and from there we opened a distillery, and we've been at it almost 9 years now. So that 6-month-old baby is about 12 and a half. But my husband went back to his good friend Lamar and said, I'll build it, I'll license it, you come run the still for me. And that's how it got started. Lamar taught us everything he knew about distilling. You know, Lamar at the time was distilling, when he was a young man, was distilling back in the woods. And so he brought all that indoors. He thought it was one of the coolest things. I think he thought was, in the summertime, we used to run at night because it got so warm. It was very difficult to run. Our old still was direct fire, so it had an open flame. Our new stills run off steam, so it's not near as hot. But in the summertime, we used to run at night, and so Lamar would come out and run at night for us. And so there was one night, 2 or 3 in the morning, one of the local deputies, a lot of times they will come up to our property and park under the trees just because it's somewhere they can be away from kind of the town and the hubbub and write their reports and that kind of thing. And so one night Lamar was out cooking, and one of the local deputies came out to write some of his reports and sat down and talked to Lamar for quite some time. And he thought he just got a kick out of that. You know, that 50
I
years
can
ago,
do this and talk to a police officer
Right.
at the same time.
50 years ago, he'd have been running from the law, but
Right.
there he was, sitting down, chatting with a police officer, having a good old time.
And I still didn't have a high school diploma, and I can still do this.
That's exactly.
In the face of all the people who say, you must go to college, you must get a degree.
Absolutely.
No, not really.
Not really. Lamar did a lot of things in his life, so.
So, why did you and your husband, or why did he think that distilling was, it just because Lamar had said, hey, I'm doing this thing and it's more difficult, and your husband decided to say, well, this seemed like an interesting challenge. I mean, you could pick anything to go into.
It did seem like an interesting challenge. Craig was fresh out of his MBA at the Darla Moore School of Business at USC. So again, family divided, right? Clemson,
I
Carolina.
thought he was a Clemson man.
He is a
myself.
Clemson man,
Oh,
but
so he's individually divided.
he is individually divided. So
Good for him.
there's it's tough. It's strange in our house, but he is. So his master's is from Carolina, and he was fresh out of that. And Lamar was talking about this and had just decided to not pursue it any further. And Craig thought it was a great business opportunity. He knew there was quite a bit of opportunity there.
So he was just kind of looking for a business
He
to
was
have.
looking for a business to have.
Could have been any kind of business, really.
Right. And he realized, it was very young in the industry at the time that we were entering, because the industry was so new in South Carolina. And so it was just attractive to him, and that's how it really started.
Yeah, well, kudos to him, because as I have looked at this kind of thing myself, it's done well. It's a license to print money. People will buy alcoholic beverages, moonshine, whiskey, whatever. They will buy that till the cows come home. They will buy that in spite of every other thing that they might have to buy. They might give some of that stuff up. But there's something about a nice alcoholic beverage,
Right.
that gets to, connecting people together. I mean, it's not like Jesus didn't serve wine.
That is true.
It's not like it's been the preservative of choice for ages and ages and ages. I mean, fermenting foods has long been a thing. And you mentioned microbiome.
Right.
Fermented foods is huge.
Huge. Absolutely.
In maintaining a good, healthy body. So it's the kind of thing that it's the natural thing of what you do when you grow grains.
Right.
Or almost anything. You can grow this. Now, what am I going to do with this? Well, I can grow grapes and I can make wine, and people will take that wine and they will have a grand old time.
Right.
So I can grow happiness in my field.
Right. There's only and I think that's how, really fermenting and distilling started, is there's only so much of a product that you can consume before it's going to
go bad.
And then you have the opportunity to ferment it and, make a
Over
wine
those
or
long
beer
winter
or
months,
spirit.
a beer or wine or whiskey or whatever might make you forget that you're cold and hungry.
That's
and
right.
Can't wait until spring to come along.
That's right.
So you had no prior idea that you would ever find yourself running a still, making whiskey and moonshine.
Absolutely
So
not.
the preacher's daughter was going to be a medical engineer, biomedical engineer, then working as an environmental engineer, and now you're making whiskey on the weekends.
Make a little whiskey on the weekends, yeah. So I had no idea that we were going to do that. But of course, I have worked on the regulatory side of business and industry, and Craig had worked in a heavily regulated industry, and so we weren't scared of the paperwork, of the red tape, and so that was certainly helpful. But we certainly had no idea. I think a lot of people are surprised at the business that we've gone into, that we weren't.
What's your favorite part of it?
I really enjoy being at the bar, at the distillery, and talking and connecting with people, which is interesting. I'm an introvert, but I very much love to connect with people one-on-one.
Right.
And so that's been a great opportunity. We talked a little bit about that, but it just realizing that everyone has some sort of connection. There is some level of connection that we all have, no matter what it may be.
Does the science of it, the engineering of it,
Absolutely.
Because I'm going to say, you've got a bit of obviously an engineering type of a thought. There's definitely a somewhat, don't want to say mechanical, but there's certainly. I'll bet you were good in math in high school.
I was. I liked math a lot.
So there's a lot of math that goes into this, even if you don't think about it.
Right.
But you can't probably do a good job of making an alcoholic beverage without a lot of math, even if you don't realize what's
right.
there. Is there a part of it that you find that's really hard?
I don't know that there's a lot that I find interesting. So all the distillation process, all the fermentation, it's all science, whether it's biology when you're fermenting, it's organic chemistry when you're distilling. And so I love the opportunity when folks bring children in to take them over to the distillery and show them science at work. And we had a kid come back. He was maybe 16 or so when he came into the distillery, and he came back a couple of weeks ago. He's 18 now. And he said, I learned more in your tour than I ever learned in my high school science classes. And so that made me feel good. I'm a woman in science, and that you don't find as many of those as you find men. And so I always felt like it was a great opportunity to show children, no matter male, female, but just show them sciences and how cool they are. And so when I get the opportunity to do that at the distillery, I find that really awesome to just energize kids about science and even math. So my husband's mother, or my mother-in-law, is a retired math teacher, and she did not retire until after we opened the distillery. But we told her, we said, you need to tell your kids they need to learn algebra, because you know what you use algebra for? That's how to proof your spirits. So there's practical applications.
Well, yeah, there's also, specific gravities.
Absolutely.
And to try and determine what kind of alcohol do I have, what temperatures are going to produce what. This is why, as I've kind of gotten myself more into this area, because the idea of running a still and running a distillery is hugely appealing to me, because I also have a mathematical square background.
Brain.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I'm a binary guy, ones and zeros,
right.
Very black and white. Gray areas, I'm not really big in the gray areas. Right and wrong, I have a very defined sense of what's right and wrong. I'm going to offend a bunch of people, but I have too much personality to be an accountant. But otherwise, I would be an accountant, I have no doubt. Sorry, that's to all my accounting friends. Nonetheless, I find it fascinating, but that's the thing to me that gets a little intimidating, because I start thinking about, well, wait a minute, as soon as you start distilling, the first alcohol that comes off is deadly.
Right.
And there's a large gray area between deadly and tasty.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You don't want to get too close to the deadly side of that until you get into the tasty side of that. But then that's all the chemistry and everything else that's going on behind the scenes. When you guys are making your vodkas and your moonshines,
right,
how much of that is you're just distilling the heck out of it to get to just a very neutral grain spirit versus I want some of that flavor to come through. If I started with a bunch of wheat or if I started with a bunch of corn, you're going to get a certain character to what the liquid you get at the end.
Right.
Even though it's highly alcoholic, you're still going to get a lot of flavor in there. How much of that do you want to keep in? How do you figure out?
There's definitely a fine line there, right?
So how much of that are you tasting?
Right.
Or smelling?
You're tasting it, you're smelling it, you're running your finger under the tap and kind of smelling and tasting what's coming there, and you're also watching temperatures, you're watching proof points, and so there is a fine line, but yeah, you try not to taste too much, right?
So who's got the better nose and palate, you or your husband?
I have the better nose, for sure. He has the better palate.
I have largely found this to be true. So this is why I think, personally, I think you need men and women in this business a lot, because I have almost consistently found that women seem to have a much better nose to be able to pick out different things, and I don't know why that would be.
I have read, and I don't know if this is true or not, but in pregnancy, they say oftentimes women develop a really strong sense of smell, and that's supposed to help protect them and the baby. And I really do believe my sense of smell got stronger in pregnancy, and it never went, and that's been 12 and a half years ago, and it never went away.
Well, you've always got to be on the lookout for bad food. You know, is this stuff going bad? Is this going to be a danger to my child? Because they depend on that protection for life, because infants are extremely vulnerable.
There are scientific studies that say that the sense of smell in women becomes stronger during pregnancy. So I don't know if that's something that stays. I do feel like my sense of smell has definitely stayed.
I understand they're better shooters too.
It kills my husband, but yeah, I can be a better shot with a rifle and not with a shotgun, but with a rifle than him. It kills him.
Yeah, we are definitely a competitive species, or at least
Yes.
we are the competitive half of the species.
That is true.
But I know that if I'm trying a new, especially any kind of new bourbons or anything lately, I offer them to my wife. I'm like, what are you smelling in this? What do you know? I don't pick up half of the things that she picks up.
Right.
And she gets them right away.
Right.
Way better at it than I am. And so that's good to have around. It's a little intimidating sometimes.
Absolutely.
Because you never know what's coming in there. So as you've gotten into this, were you much of a alcohol beverage drinker prior to this? What's this opened you up to?
So I was a red wine drinker, mainly.
Any red wine? What was your particular red wine?
Cabernet Sauvignon, mainly. I did start out drinking sweeter reds and then moved towards Cab Sav. And since we've been in the spirits industry, definitely I had a rough go with vodka many years ago, you know, young and dumb, and you do a lot of dumb things. And so I had always sworn if we make vodka, it's going to have to be great because I just can't stomach it. And I'm a vodka fan now. I do like our vodka.
I will tell you, your low water vodka is very good. I don't know. We don't use a lot of vodka here. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I have so much other whiskeys. But that surprises me, because historically I've drank a lot of vodka-based drinks, not knowing why.
Right.
And I've never really... There's some vodkas I'm like, these are terrible. I really don't like vodka.
Right.
So then I would say I just don't like vodka in general, because I don't know any better.
Right.
As that palate has gotten a little bit more refined, like, oh, wait a minute, there are some good vodkas. So my experience so far with your low water vodka has been, that is in the top tier.
Very good.
For a while I would have said that Tito's would have been my go-to vodka. But if it wasn't Tito's, it was probably going to be Absolute.
Right.
I would rather, at this point, if I'm going to just drink a sip of vodka, which I never would have thought I would have, I would do that with your vodka. My wife will do the same thing. There's a reason that bottle's half empty up there.
I definitely
We'll squeeze
enjoy,
a lemon and
yeah.
Off you go. And I'm like, what are you doing?
I definitely enjoy a vodka cocktail. I have learned to enjoy and appreciate dark liquors though. I was never a dark liquor or bourbon whiskey, but I know you asked me what kind of cocktail do you drink, and Old Fashioned is right up there with them. I've learned to really appreciate all the different nuances that there are with the different grains and the different barrel finishes, and it's...
Yeah, but I've also found you've got to have somewhat of an idea of what you're getting into.
Right.
There's somewhere here, I think right behind you, it's over here on the fireplace, the Baby Blue, a Balcones, Texas bourbon. And it's made from blue corn. And I didn't know corn came in the color blue.
Right.
Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Maybe they just call it blue corn.
It does, yeah.
But the first time I had it, I hated it. And I've told this story to people many times. It was terrible. And I think it was largely because I didn't know what to expect. I then read a review, probably watched somebody on YouTube doing a review of it, and they talked about, it had kind of a powder sugar, powder candy kind of a taste or a flavor profile. I thought, really? That wasn't my experience at all. So I opened the bottle again, poured some out of it, and tried it again. Damn if it didn't have that exact thing, because it had been planted in my brain.
Right.
And that changed everything about it. I'm like, oh, well, okay. Maybe there's other things I don't like that now I do. So I find, I've been telling people this now, there's no bad whiskeys.
Right.
It's really a matter of where your brain is at any given time. You know, what's in the air, what have you eaten, how hungry are you, what are you in the mood for? You know, it's, I mean, I can sit down with a cheap bottom shelf bourbon and enjoy it. And I can sit down with a really expensive top shelf and go, yeah, this is crap.
Yeah.
Money is not the answer.
It is not.
It's a whole lot of different things.
Right.
Some of the moonshines that I've had, I've been, but then there's others that I have, I'm like, well, wait a minute. And you have a couple of those too. So you guys got quite the variety. Is there an end to where your variety is or?
I don't think so. So we started out almost 9 years ago as strictly a moonshine company, because moonshine is what you can get off the ground with and
make it and sell it.
Make it and sell it. And the bank kind of wanted their money back, so we had to start somewhere. And then of course we set on some bourbon, some whiskeys for a while, and got those out. And so now we've got our moonshine line with several flavors. We've got bourbons, 2 bourbons, whiskey, and a bunch of different iterations of those guys, and a vodka. And so now we're trying this family reserve release. So it's giving us an opportunity to kind of try the market in different areas and see what sticks. We had a gin release earlier this year, which was very popular.
I've had that.
You've had that.
Bought a bottle of it right there.
Indeed, it is. So the gin release went really well. On Saturday, we just had a maple infused bourbon that went super well. Went so quickly, we regret we didn't make more. And
I regret that I wasn't here to get some, because I was hoping to say, well, I'll be in to get some, but you don't have any.
Right. So that will return at some point. Not sure how quickly. The gin will return again because it was so popular. So we're just trying the market with different things depending on what they are. It may be a different flavored iteration of a product that we already have. It may be a new product altogether, and to see where the market lies. And then the beautiful thing about small business is you can turn on a dime and you can do all different things versus being very pigeonholed in one area. And so
but you can't turn on a dime on 4 years of aging.
That is true. Right. Our aged products, that's a different story.
You've only got so much of it, and you can make more.
But it takes time.
4 years from now, you can sell it.
Right.
Maybe you can get away with 2 or 3 years, but
that takes time.
Yeah.
That absolutely takes time.
How frustrating is that?
It can be frustrating because you know that there's market there, but you only have so much to service the market. That can definitely be frustrating.
But on the other side, how exciting is it to go, okay, we have this new release, like you had this weekend,
right,
and you had no idea. You're like, we don't know how this is going to go.
Right.
And obviously you sold out of it,
right, 3
hours probably?
Right. We tried to shoot high on that one, and we sold out in 3.5 hours. So, the good news with that one is it is essentially a flavored iteration of the bourbons that we have. So we do have the opportunity.
Now, was that infused, or was that finished in maple barrels? How did it?
It was infused, so it was not finished in maple barrels. So we do have the option that we can do that more quickly. It's just a matter of how much bourbon do we have that we can turn over in that manner.
So where'd the maple come from?
Oh, we can't reveal our sources now.
Was this U.S. maple trees, maple syrup?
It was indeed.
Of course, much of the North is more famous for their
absolutely
maple syrup, but it turns out, we were talking to somebody over the weekend. They had dogwood syrup, I think.
No, I've not heard of that.
They were the same way. I had never heard this before, being somewhere in the South. I forget who it was that was talking about it. But they were learning that, well, wait a minute, we can use all these different trees and they have different kind of characters, and some of that is good, and some of it's maybe not. I mean,
there is some maple syrup that is the closest we can get to us is the very, very tippy top of North Carolina, and this did not come from there, but we are in talks with some folks that are, it's either Virginia or West Virginia. It's pretty close to the line there of North Carolina, and so that would be our eventual source of the maple. But we try to use as much local as we can. Again, maple syrup's just not something that we have here. Now, honey, absolutely. I actually stopped by the honey folks' place right before I came to your house. They're not too far from here, so I stopped by to get some more honey for our honey moonshine. And so again, we try to use as much local as we can, but maple syrup's just not one of those.
Yeah. So all of this is obviously going somewhere. You can't. This distillery won't survive as a part-time operation. At a certain point, the success will kill it.
Right.
Because people will want what you have, you'll run out of it, and then they'll stop coming to get it. So when does this become your full-time? Like, yes, I am full-time. My big girl job making whiskey and moonshine.
That's a good question.
Is that an exciting thought for you?
That is a great thought. That's a great thought.
Handing it down from one generation to the next.
Absolutely. My husband and I, started this 9 years ago now, and so we'd love to hand it down to our son. He's 12, so we've got some time before he's even ready to see that. I would like to make it to retirement age, and doing the job that I'm doing now, I really love it. I love to help the folks of South Carolina. I've got about 9.5 years left till state retirement, but we shall see.
All right, so you've, in your wine world and your wine experiences, how do you take that into your whiskey, into your whiskey endeavors? How does that influence that? Or what would you say to the person who drinks a lot of wine? How would you say, here's your introduction point, here's where whiskey might be something for you to try, and why they might want to try it?
I do think that there are some oaky or rich notes, especially to red wine. White wine's a little different. I'm not a big white wine person, but I think there are some oaky and rich notes to that red wine that you can really pick up in bourbons and whiskeys, depending they're kind of where they lie on the palate. And so if nothing else, start with a bourbon or whiskey cocktail and go from there and see what you like. It's certainly going to be a stretch to jump from a red wine straight to a 90 proof bourbon or whiskey, but go into some cocktails, see if you can find some of those notes of things that you like. And again, I'm kind of an equal opportunity there.
Where was your path?
I went from red wines to white liquors. So, your moonshines, your flavored moonshines, your vodka, believe it or not, after I swore I would never touch it again, and get a good vodka, number one, and have a nice cocktail, and then really just keep trying those bourbons, keep trying those whiskeys, find some hints of flavors that you like, and develop your palate. We always say, drink it how you like it. I know there are some purists that say, oh, you should only drink it neat, or oh, you should only drink it on the rocks, whatever they say. Drink it how you like it. I don't care if you like it mixed with something. Drink it how you like it. If you're not enjoying it, what's the point? So.
Yeah, I made old fashions for a couple of people this weekend, and one person who I thought was going to like it a lot, because she was the one that requested that I do it in the first place, she hated it. And I felt terrible because, well, I wanted somebody to like it.
Right.
But I made two, and the other person thought it was great. So I'm like, okay, the first person, I'm like, all right, it didn't fit on your palate tonight, because I thought maybe I made it wrong, maybe I made it bad, whatever it was. But it is it's a matter of taste. So as you've gone through this, you went back to vodka and you found out, wait a minute, a good vodka, or whatever works for you.
Right.
What else has happened along that process? What else have you found that you went, wow, that was unexpectedly good that I didn't think I would like that?
Our gin. I swore I would never drink gin.
I'm in that camp with you.
And I really ended up enjoying it. I made a couple of cocktails with it, and I enjoyed it. Gin is probably not something I'm going to drink neat, but I will definitely enjoy it in a cocktail.
Typically, I would not drink gin neat. I drink your gin neat.
Fantastic.
It is, and I'll have to give all the credit to Erin for that, because I know
Absolutely.
that's her
Hats
concoction.
off to her.
But I was told in college, don't drink gin. It's
Right.
bad for you, so I believed it. What the heck,
Right.
It'd be like kids today, AI told me to do whatever, so I believed it.
Believe it.
And it won't be until some later point in life when you start questioning everything and you realize that, oh, well, I should have just ignored that advice because I missed out on a lot. But a regular, let's say a London dry gin,
Right.
it's not that enjoyable to
No.
drink.
Right. It's not for me.
But your gin, Erin's gin, has a lot of different herbs and floral notes in there that are not typically in the standard traditional gin, let's say.
Right.
And it went into a barrel, and it got a little aging in the barrel and rested, let's say, in the barrel.
Right.
And that's just enough to change that, enough to make it worth doing. What's interesting is it still cuts through in a cocktail.
It does.
Because I've put it into several cocktails, and I'm like, I can still taste that stuff in there, and that's nice. So let's go back a few years.
Okay.
Gilbert,
Mm-hmm.
you were a young girl.
Mm-hmm.
You played clarinet.
I did.
What happened?
What happened to the young girl that played clarinet? So I did. I played clarinet in marching band. I was part of the, I believe it was 1997 state championship 2A high school in South Carolina, and did play clarinet in the marching band through graduation. Gave that up.
Have you played since
I
then?
have not really played since, maybe a little bit. My sister's very musical, and so she would sometimes con me into playing clarinet along with her. She would be playing the organ or the piano at church, and I would play alongside her, maybe a little in college, but that's been pretty much it. And
So have you encountered things like the Lexington Community Band and thought, oh, that could be kind of fun to do, or does that not attract you much anymore?
I enjoyed it while I was in high school, but I'm just not near as musical as.
Do you think some of that musical experience has rubbed off in some positive way? Like, they're taking something from that.
Absolutely.
My mother was a music teacher, so there's always an interest in this. I've always found that music and math go together.
Absolutely.
Very much. And it's also been the kind of thing that, through my life, has been a great gateway to a lot of experiences that I find fairly rewarding. And it's the same thing as let's say, alcohol. It's a gateway to a lot of individuals that I get to meet and a lot of connections with people.
Absolutely. Even growing up kind of in the band, I made a lot of connections with kids and their parents who I still see today, which, those band parents, we call them, are still our parents.
How often do they come into the
They are in the distillery quite a bit.
And then make the connection there, like, wait a minute, I know you.
It's a flashback, and I've seen both of my high school band directors come back through the distillery. It's been great. But that music and math, 100%, they go together. A lot of kids that are that are participate in music are good in math and excel in math, and so just some of those connections that I made have stayed true for sure. It did. Again, I built connections with a lot of the folks in the community, and it was a lot of time spent in marching band and other band activities, and kept me out of a little bit of trouble. So that wasn't a bad thing.
Do you get sideways glances, so to speak, from people who find, A, you work for the government, so you are already like the enemy of half the people, and B, you're a preacher's daughter who's making alcohol, making whiskey for a living, or for a sideline anyway. There must be a lot of people that think,
The people there have been
did
a
they
lot
give you a
of
little
people,
stink eye?
There have been a lot of people that have been surprised at the opening of a distillery. That's been a big surprise, just because I wasn't. My husband wasn't. That's just not what people saw us, doing.
But how much support? I mean, how much big smile comes along with that?
The community support has been huge, though, and it's it's been great. It feels good to have built something and be part of the community. We were always trying to kind of tie back in. We just did a small business Saturday where we had a lot of local vendors where we're kind of giving back to other small businesses and giving them a platform to come in and show off their work to others. And even during the pandemic, which was a crazy, that was 3.5 years ago. That was a crazy time. I know.
I'm not sure the craziness has ended yet.
I don't know that it's ended. My husband had some family. We'll just say that my husband had some family that had a little concern about us having a distillery and all that. And then I think when the pandemic happened, and it was an interesting time, but because we had a micro distillery, we had both a federal license that allowed us to not only make liquor but import liquor from other states or other entities. And so we helped generate 16,000 gallons of hand sanitizer for the state of South Carolina, and it was really a blessing to be able to do that and to give back to the community in which we were a part of and had grown up in. And I think that was an eye-opening experience. It was like we were put in this spot and for a reason, and it was great to be able to be part of that. And again, it's just kind of helped being part of that community and being tied back into.
I think there's lots of things that are, if they're not directly the hand of God, the circumstances were created for whatever to happen. I mean, there's been so many times in my life that I've had experiences where I've thought, yeah, there but for the grace of God go I. Or it's like, why am I in this spot right now? This is weird. This doesn't make sense. And a lot of times I don't try to question it.
Right.
But I find that to be very comforting.
What a unique, it is, it's very comforting because it's, again, we were put in a very unique situation in that we were one of very few people that had the ability and the opportunity. The state government came to Hollow Creek Distillery and said, can you help us? We need hand sanitizer for our first responders and for those people that have to be out in the community. And the state government didn't have the federal licenses to do what we could do. And so, again, the hand of God.
Did they just go around to all the distilleries? Or
they contacted, it was 2 or 3. I think it was 3. And we happened to be one of them. And they said, we've seen other states are able to utilize their distilleries. Is this something you can do? And so we talk about small business turning on a dime. Because it's just my husband and I, we literally sat around the dinner table one night and said, yep, this is what we're going to do. We called him back the next day. We'll help you out. We were sitting in Lowe's. If anybody saw us, they would have thought we were crazy, but we were literally on the floor of Lowe's putting together pipe fittings and things like that to make the apparatuses that we were going to use to essentially kind of bottle hand sanitizer. And
I was there doing the same thing, but it was just to build shelves.
It was a wild time. We did that, and so within 4 days of having the call made to us, within 4 days we had delivered hand sanitizer to the state. The first little bit, I think it was about 75 gallons that we delivered that first delivery because they were just begging anybody that they could get. And versus within about 9 months or so, we were out of the business of hand sanitizer because Exxon had come online and they were making 5 million gallons a day. And that's wonderful that they can make 5 million gallons a day. We could nowhere compete with that. But we stood in the gap for those 9 months.
You weren't trying to compete with it.
We weren't trying, right. But we could stand in the gap. And so, I think that was the other, COVID was kind of this crazy time. But, we started out as a distillery and we built ourselves as a distillery, but then COVID happened and we stepped up for our community and we made hand sanitizer and our name got out there, and then we kind of exploded after COVID. And I think part of that was folks all around the community saw that it's not the big guys that are going to pull you out of the ditch. when you got a problem. It's the small businesses that's what's going to happen.
It's
And
your
so
local. It's your local people.
The local
that's,
people.
But that's kind of my whole objective here is to
Absolutely.
tie people locally together,
Absolutely.
and just to get people to know that there are things here. I mean,
you have access and you have opportunities, and you're right.
I mean, I'll just even from a whiskey standpoint, or even a moonshine standpoint, yes, there's a lot of good stuff out there, but there's also good stuff locally.
Right.
And wouldn't you get just as much and maybe even more satisfaction out of this is my local product versus this came over from China?
Right.
Right. Maybe it cost me an extra $1 or $2. Why it should, I don't know, but maybe it cost me an extra $1 or $2 to buy the product that was grown locally, or was produced locally, was
right.
Handcrafted, some artisan built, whatever it is. If I redo this table, wouldn't it be cool if I had wood from trees in my backyard?
Right.
It might cost me a whole lot more to do something like that versus, well, this is wood that was grown in Japan or something like that.
Right.
And so, to me, I mean, if you can get good quality products, whatever they are,
right,
they're far better local. I mentioned the Lexington Community Band.
Yeah.
The weird thing about that, hopefully I'll get, this is where I'm coercing a man named John Amerso to, John, if I'm talking to you, you need to be here. This is a story I'm sure I'll retell if I can get John on here to talk about things, but yeah, I played trombone for a lot of years. And so this little weird story, I've been in this town playing music for a long time. I played with Lexington, with the Lake Mary Symphony. I played with the community band, the Columbia Community Band that rehearses out at Airport High School. There I started my own trombone ensemble. I put together a little brass trombone quartet. We played over at Pilgrim Lutheran Church,
Okay.
which is how I encountered Nancy Gibbons over there, and that led to a very lengthy relationship there, which was always very rewarding. I played with a brass quintet out of Columbia, the Capital City Brass Quintet. Had some very interesting experiences there, some very rewarding. Ended up playing with the Masterworks Choir out of Florence, and did some awesome things there, and met different people I never would have met otherwise. But felt like I knew almost everybody in the local music community around here. Getting a water bill one day from the town of Lexington, and they're talking about the starting up of the Lexington Community Band.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I didn't know we were going to do that. Who's doing this? I look into it, and I see this guy, John Amerso, is the conductor and creator of this band. And I thought, I don't know any John Amerso. Who's this? I mean,
right.
clearly he's a nobody because I don't know him. Sorry, John. He's laughing. So I went and looked up who John Amerso is, and it turns out he went to the Crane School of Music.
Yeah.
So did I. Now that's a part of the State University of New York in Potsdam, New York, which is a tiny little town, slightly larger than Gilbert. Not much more than that, though. Up in northern New York, deep into maple syrup country.
Okay.
We were closer to, the closest big city was Ottawa. Montreal was the next big closest city, and then Syracuse was like 2.5 hours away.
Okay.
And this is
So
north
yeah.
of Syracuse, New York.
Okay.
You're way up there. And I'm like, well, this is a small place. Fancy running into somebody from there here.
Here, right.
So I meet him, and he and a good friend of his, Brian Clancy, were starting up this band. So I said, hey, I think we went to school. Think we went to the same school. When were you there? Same 4 years I was there. Like, really? Don't remember meeting a John Amerso over there. And so one thing leads to another. And so where this in 1983, 84, when I was there as a freshman, where he was in this dorm, I was in that dorm. I said, okay, it makes sense. Maybe we didn't run into each other there. I said, okay, my junior year, I moved off campus and moved over to the Main Street Apartments. He said, yeah, so did we. I said, really? There aren't that many buildings over there. There aren't that many apartments. I said, well, we were in this second building and across the other side of the quad from the parking lot, top floor, or the second floor, at the top of the stairs. He goes, no, we were one door down. These guys were my literal next door neighbors for a year.
And you didn't know?
No. Both he and Brian Clancy are percussionists. I play trombone. I said, so, were you in the orchestra at all? Oh, yeah. I said, were you in the orchestra in the fall of 1983? Yeah, I think so. I said, we did like the Firebird Suite and Siegfried's Rhine Journey, and we went on tour. He goes, yeah. Really? There are pictures in the yearbook. I have it. Here's Alan, and here's John and Brian in the same photograph, right behind me.
No idea.
Never mind.
That's wild.
I meet them here in this town. Now, they had been here for a number of years before I met them. They run what's now Clara and Ray's Italian restaurant.
Right, okay.
They're the best pizza in town.
Yes.
And no, I'm not just saying that. It is, by far, in my opinion, the best pizza in town. Two band directors. They went to school in music and went and taught music for 25 years on Long Island, and then retired and moved their families down here. And they opened an Italian restaurant making pizza, New York style pizza.
How about that?
And I happened to run into them with the Lexington Community Band. Now that band is loaded with a bunch of people from Gilbert, Lexington, or whatever,
Right.
that hadn't played their clarinet in 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is, and picked it back up and back into the community.
Right.
So that's why I was asking about that, because even if, this is another one of those things that brings people together. Music is definitely one of those things, but a performing group like that, you meet people that you didn't know you knew, and the stories I've got from that kind of experience just here, when I first started a trombone ensemble, there were a couple guys that showed up that hadn't seen each other in like 20 years, but they were best friends in college.
Mm-hmm.
And out of the blue, I had somehow encountered both of them and brought them together. They hadn't seen each other before. There was a guy that I brought in who was working as a database administrator at Blue Cross.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, he was in the United States Army and was in Pershing's own U.S. Army Band in Washington, D.C., which is the creme de la creme.
Yeah.
This is the crew. These are the only people in the Army, forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, but they're the only people in the Army that don't have to pick up a gun in the time of war. Everybody else got to pick up a gun, well, except the president. But it's like the president and these guys in that band, they don't have to pick up a gun. They just have to make music, and they're really good at it.
Very good. Right.
And this guy did that. And now he's a DBA at Blue Cross. Like,
Okay.
really? Please come out and play with us. And he did. And it was fantastic. And it's just, the experiences of bringing all this together has been rewarding.
It's amazing how small the world can be when you
So you
really
find
start.
this when you're standing there at the bar.
Absolutely.
You're in the distillery and people come in. So who's come in that you're like, I hadn't seen this person in 20 years. There's clearly in the local audience, there's people that have come in there and you thought, oh my goodness, this was such a rewarding experience.
I've seen many.
You've had both your old high school band directors come in.
Both the old high school band directors. Many folks from high school come through, and or their parents or brothers, sisters, those kind of things. Some of the newscasters that I grew up watching on TV, I've seen them come back through, and it's been amazing. We actually very recently had a master distiller from one of the large Kentucky distilleries come in to visit, and just because
Were they
he
just
was
traveling
in town,
around?
they were traveling through to come see their child, and
Oh, they weren't distillery hopping. They were just here and said, as long as I'm
just
here.
and they happened to look us up, and so that was a really cool experience to have them come in and visit us. And so
What did you learn from them? You had to learn something.
I hope that we get the opportunity to go up there and visit their facility. They definitely came in and had questions about, they run continuous stills, and so they definitely had questions about our smaller batch system that we run. We run 800-gallon stills at a time. We run them we run it once. then let it cool down, and then run another batch another day or two or however long. And so it's not a continuous process. And so they had questions about that, and came in, tasted a bunch, and had a good time, brought their family in. And so it's a cool experience to get to see that through.
When you're talking about this and thinking about this, you can see, it kind of lights you up.
It does.
There's a lot of pleasure that comes out of that, and it's not just from making whiskey. It's the people. It
is. The making whiskey is great, but the personal connection is what I really enjoy. I think my husband would probably tell you the making whiskey and all that is his thing, but to me, the personal connection is where it's at.
So, when you're starting this, you said you made moonshine because you got to pay the bank.
Right.
Why did you not choose the other route you have a couple options, right? You can start making your own thing and wait for time, or you make vodka, you make moonshine because you can sell that right away.
Right.
Other stuff takes time to age. Other people go to distributors and say, I'd like to buy your pre-distilled product, and then I can do my own little thing with that. Why didn't you go the sourcing route?
We wanted to be authentic, and we felt like, us doing our own thing was really where it was at, and we wanted to be just authentic and true to ourselves. And so we started out again with Lamar's good recipe from the backwoods when he was carrying bags of corn through the woods for his daddy when he was 10 and 12 years old. And so we wanted to start with that true recipe and make it how it was, and then make our bourbons and stack them up and sit on them and wait. And we felt like that was...
How much have you got a sense of, I don't want to say satisfaction, I think a sense of comfort? A lot of times I think in life there's a lot of things that I get anxious about. I worry about the future. How much of this has caused your future anxiety to go, I'm comfortable now? I'm not comfortable, and it's not a matter of, gee, I've got money in the bank. That's not the comfort I'm talking about. The comfort I'm talking about is, I don't worry about the future. I know that I'm good with it. Has that changed your outlook?
It definitely has for my husband, I would say. My husband has always been one to say that, he doesn't want to depend on someone else. And so that, again, he comes from a long line of self-employed individuals, between his great-granddad that ran the ferry over the rivers, his granddad was a carpenter, those kind of things. I took the more traditional route and said, well, I'll work for the government, the government's going to be there, that kind of thing. But it's been rewarding as we've built our own thing, and to know that we've built our own business and become part of the community, and we're there and we're doing it and we're working through, and it's a nice sense of security there.
Yeah, I would think that I don't know how far back my self-employment history goes. My father was self-employed for most of his career. My grandfather on his side was, and he immigrated from England when he was in his teens, I think. So anything he ever got, he was just happy to. If he had a tomato, he couldn't have been happier. It's like, yep, got a tomato, I'm good. Tomorrow's going to bring whatever tomorrow's going to bring.
Right.
My mother's side of the family is farmers from all the way back, and they're like, yeah, we just going to grow whatever we're going to grow, whether it's maybe they're raising livestock and dairy cattle or whatever the story is, but it's all self-reliant. There's a certain draw to me to that kind of thing, which is why I think the idea of a distillery has been attractive for that very reason.
It's a very cool mix between agriculture, and you've got your grains and you've got those inputs, and then industry, right? And you're making the outputs. You're taking your grains in, you're making your outputs. And my husband's kind of a production guy, and so he grew up on a farm, and so he's very comfortable with the inputs part but then he spent his career in production, and so it was a good business as far as he was concerned, because he was comfortable with the inputs in the farming, and he was understanding of the production process. And so, yeah, you talked about it's kind of a sidebar, but talked about your farmers, and if he had a tomato, he was, happy with that. My dad's side of the family, my dad's dad, who actually William Allen is named for, and our son Will is named for, when he grew up in he had quite a number of brothers and sisters, and grew up in a not so wealthy family. And so if it was good at a Christmas, they would get an apple or an orange in their stocking. And so to this day, I'm 40, my sister's 44, and when we go to our parents' house for Christmas, there'll be candy and whatnot in our stockings, but in those stockings there will also be an apple or an orange, and
always got an orange in my stocking at Christmas.
And that is to remind us that, our grandfather, if times were good, he got an orange. And so, to kind of tying back to those humble roots. And again, the same with my husband and his, grandfather that was a carpenter, and great-grandfather that was a ferry captain. It was, very humble roots. And so
it's one of those things that we're getting away from over time.
Absolutely.
And so, speaking of getting away from things, you have 3 jobs.
Okay.
You're a mother.
I am.
And you work for the state.
I do.
And you work for a distillery, you run a distillery. How do you
balance that?
Most people have a hard time with one job. So, Wonder Woman?
I stay busy. I do.
You stay busy.
I stay busy. And
I have a feeling that's an understatement.
I don't sit still very well, so that is a good thing, because if I sit still very well.
How blessed do you feel, though?
I do.
It's got to be a little bit overwhelming if you stop and think about it. Do you allow yourself?
Not really. I do. There are times that I do sit back and think that, so Craig and I, my husband and I, have been together since we were 14 years old. We started dating as high school sweethearts, and we've been together ever since. And so we, went on to engineering school together. We were both engineers coming out of school, and we started our careers, and we started a business. We started our careers, and then we had a child, and then we started a business. And so, when I'm able to step back and think, there's been a lot that's been packed into all those years that we've been together, and I do feel very, very blessed, and we do stay busy, but we hope that the biggest thing to me is that our biggest gift that we're given is our son, and that we're doing justice to him and helping raise him in a way that we want him to be raised, and spending the time with him. So just like when I'm here this evening, Craig was with him at archery practice, because Craig is helping coach the archery team in his free time. And so, we try to make sure that
it's not like he doesn't have 3 jobs either.
Yeah, he's got a couple of jobs too, and so we try to make sure that we do what we can. And so that's the biggest thing, is us to be parents and raise him well first, and then accomplish our other goals.
So how do you, if you look around at Lexington County and the changes that have taken place in your experience here, how do you deal with that? I mean, the changes just that I've seen, we've been here coming up on 20 years. It's remarkable, the change that has taken place. And I think if you look toward Atlanta, you can see what our future is.
Absolutely. It's unreal to me. I moved to Gilbert when I was 8, so that's been 32 years ago or so. And
let's not do the math.
Let's not do the math. Just had the big 4-0 recently. But 32 years ago, moved to Gilbert, and it was a small town. When we moved there were 2 schools. There are 4 now. So a lot has grown. We're seeing it continue to kind of move out towards the Gilbert area. And when we opened the distillery 9 years ago, we were one of the only businesses out in that area, but you're starting to see business migrate out that way, and so it's growth, and it's a good thing, but it's also, there are struggles along with it, and I understand. I mean, there's people that have lived here their whole lives, and they're struggling with the growth that we're experiencing, and I understand that too. You don't want to see houses on every stitch of dirt that we have out here, but
Well, you're going to, I think.
we're going to, I think, because we're becoming essentially the outskirts of the Lexington and Columbia area, and so hopefully that will be managed, the growth will be managed over time, and all the proper infrastructure that we need will be built for those communities, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, that's why I look at Atlanta as kind of here's our future.
Right.
Because if you go visit various parts of Atlanta outside of the loop, you get out to the outskirts, it is dense and it is overpopulated, or however you want to look at it. It's just there's people everywhere. And I'm sure that was not the case 20 or 30 years ago. I have friends that live there, and when they moved there, they're like, yeah, we were at the very outskirts of town. They're now halfway to the outskirts.
Right.
Outskirts has exceeded them by a long distance.
Sure.
Now, that's been positive because, well, now there's the Publix right down the street.
Right. Right.
But it's been negative because, well, you can't get out of the neighborhood anymore. You know, and it's the same thing that's happening here. I know when we moved here almost 20 years ago, the traffic around here was nothing. And, it was busy for a couple of days before Christmas, and that was it. But it was definitely dead by Christmas Eve. I went out and did all my Christmas shopping on Christmas Eve, like most guys do.
Right.
Because, well, there's nobody out there. The streets were already empty. Now, the traffic that I used to see on maybe December 20th to 21st and 22nd, I now see that every single day.
Rush hour, every day.
Every day, and worse.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we moved here from South Florida. I grew up in New York, went to Florida, and it was great to live down there as a single individual or as married with no kids, but I didn't want to raise kids down there, which is why we came here. But the growth that I saw just in that period of time that I was down there was enough to make me kind of aware of what was going on. When I came here, they were running at an election that year. I think we moved here in 2004. They were running, the town council had some elections, and Randy Halfacre was running for mayor of Lexington. And I met him at a little neighborhood gathering. And I said, for the record, now that I'm here, would you please close the gates behind me? Because people are coming here for what Lexington is and was, not for what it's going to be. But if you don't close the gates, it's not going to be what it is or what it was. It's going to be the same thing. And I saw this happen down in Florida, where people would say, in the off season, you could roll a bowling ball down this street in the middle of summertime. It was only busy in the wintertime when all the tourists were in town.
Right.
By the time we left, it was busy all the time. And I just said, you're going to see that same thing happen here. And of course, we do.
Here we are.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's not going to change. I know it's coming because Atlanta's the vision. You can look around at that. Charlotte's already demonstrating that. The same thing will be happening here. And as long as there is population growth, and as long as this is an attractive destination, and I think it is, you're going to have that.
Absolutely. I did not realize opening this distillery allowed me to see how much of a destination Lake Murray is. And I had no idea. Growing up with it essentially in my backyard. I did not grow up on the lake, but I grew up in the big city of Gilbert, and I had no idea the attraction that Lake Murray was. And since we've opened the distillery, between visitors to the lake as well as folks coming down to visit, to find a home to live down here, is unbelievable. And it's happening. I mean, we've got people moving in all the time, and especially since COVID's a big thing, changing over, that a lot of folks are, of course, remote work now, so you can live and work here, but work for a company in New York State or California.
Company that employs me is in Toronto.
Sure. So you've got cheap cost of living down south and working for a company elsewhere. So
Yeah.
I had no idea until we opened the distillery 9 years ago what an attraction this area was. And I guess I didn't realize what a gem I grew up in, and
Well,
you know.
As your job will take you around to many
Okay.
many little towns around South Carolina, you're
Right.
going to see just how really nice it is around here.
Right.
Which is, I've encountered the same things. I mean, people come here and I'm like, what are you doing here?
Right.
And they're like, well, I came here for whatever reason it was and just fell in love with the area. And the same thing happened to us.
Right.
We came here, both my wife and I are from New York, and we never figured we'd set foot in South Carolina other than maybe stopping at a rest area on the way down to Florida from New York. And yet here we are. And even, here where we live now, I didn't figure we'd even be in this house for that long. I got a 7-year balloon mortgage, figuring we'll be out here in 3 or 4
Wow.
years. Frankly, I wanted to move up to the lake. Never did it. But I love the neighborhood. I love the town. And I'm going to die here. I have
Yeah.
no plans to go anywhere. It's just, the people are fantastic. It's one of the lessons I learned when we moved into this town was, you can't judge a book by its cover. I came up from South Florida, which is all, painted pink and purple and, turquoise and whatever. And, it was all, manicured lawns and so on and so forth. I came up here and it was not that. Definitely not
Not
that.
bad. No.
My first reaction was, Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore.
Right.
This is a little bit different.
Not,
But then I met the people,
yeah.
and I thought, what a great place to be. So,
I do think that's something that we have going for us in this area. It's just the friendliness of the people that live here, and that is something I do realize. I've done a little traveling in my life, and you don't get the friendliness elsewhere that you get here, and that's something that at the distillery we try to bring home. Is anybody that walks in the door is a friend or family, and we treat them as such. And again, my favorite part of it is standing at the bar and finding a connection with whoever's on the other side of that bar, whatever that may be. So,
Meredith, cheers to you. Thank you
Cheers.
very much.
thank you.